This is BBC World News, the latest headlines. President Trump hails the defeat of the so-called Islamic State Caliphate but warns the US will remain vigilant. Well, let's get more on this with Chris Doyle, commentator on Middle East and international politics and director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Thank you for joining me, Chris. It's becoming clear that territorial defeat does not mean the end of the Islamic State group.
It's always been very clear that, although Donald Trump has been very keen politically to try to say it's 100% defeated, and others have joined him in that, I think the saner heads are saying, well, it's all very well, and it's a signpost moment that ISIS has lost territory. It used to run a territory that was the size of Britain, a third of Syria and Iraq. But right now, all its fighters are dissipated. It remains a very potent threat. It has resources. It can be a disruptive influence in both Syria and Iraq, but also has fighters who have returned to here in Europe. So we're far from out of the woods. And I think the other thing that really troubles me is that all the conditions to breed this sort of extremism are still very much there. You look at Iraq and Syria, you see that a lot of people are now living in decimated cities. They actually don't necessarily see the coalition against ISIS, the 70-nation coalition, as necessarily always having been on their side. Remember that 80% of the city of Raqqa, that used to be de facto ISIS's capital in Syria, was destroyed. The whole of the old city of Mosul. These are cities where, frankly, it would be easier to rebuild them in some other location. So it's very hard for people living in these cities to think that those planes up above were truly on their side at all. Added to that is the fact that Donald Trump, as soon as this is nearing the end of this territorial defeat, he was announcing that US forces were going to leave and up sticks and go and leave them vulnerable, and also within a conflict between Turkish forces on the one hand, the Syrian regime, and of course the Kurds, who formed the lion's share of those forces that were fighting ISIS in Syria.
You touched on the demographics there. We know that there is a $25 million bounty on the head of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Is there any idea of his whereabouts?
Well, certainly not in the public domain. So, you know, he hasn't been seen for a long time. There's always been rumours that he might have been killed in this strike or that strike, like a lot of these jihadist leaders. But he's certainly gone to ground, and it's all part of, you know, something that ISIS will be able to demonstrate. Look, this war against ISIS has lasted longer than the entirety of the First World War. Even in their last little redoubt on the banks of the Euphrates, they last for 2 months. Their leader still hasn't been caught, apprehended or killed. So this will actually in some ways, you know, reinforce the great myth of ISIS and the belief that perhaps it might return and so forth amongst those who sadly still, you know, buy into that sort of ideology.
Chris Doyle, thank you for your insights there.